I was looking at the title and I thought, being the first speaker, I could get my cloud joke in early, which is that the title was Bringing the Cloud Down to the Earth. And as a former geographer, it occurred to me that this actually looks like fog when the cloud comes down to Earth. And actually, I regard my role, I suppose, as trying to clear some of the fog that exists around cloud. I'm going to do an introduction which is at a very generic level, because I know we have a mixed audience here of people who are more experts, certainly, than I am, and people who are probably expert in other areas. So my first round in this, in what I hope will be a multi-round exchange, is really laying out the store as we see it a little bit. The first thing to say is that cloud computing is actually here now. It's happening. It's something which is already quite widely developed. So it's not a future policy option. We're doing actually policy in relation to something which is developing. And the second thing to say is, and the reason why my Commissioner and Vice President Cruz is so keen on this topic, is that it actually changes quite substantially the way that computing is delivered and used. So it's a game changer for computer service provisioning and also for IT resource acquisition. And that said, it means that we have quite a lot of challenges in adjusting the way in which organizational behavior relates to its cloud, its IT resourcing generally. And there's quite a lot to think about. One of the things that's become apparent as I've been working on this for about just over a year as my main occupation is, and the point of entry for most organizations is, cloud has very, very substantial things to deliver in terms of reducing costs. And depending on who you're talking to, you could say that cost reductions could be the order of 30 or 40% or even more. One member state, which I know quite well, actually in some cases has achieved 90% reduction in IT resource costs for public service IT resourcing. And for public administrations facing austerity budgets, this has to be interesting. Okay. It's also very interesting for small, medium-sized enterprises, because what it does is it allows scalable access to computer resources, and most of the business growth is in delivering and using computers in order to get productivity gains. And that's really important also in the era when it's really hard to get investment capital. So if you can scale your business without having to look for large injections of capital, this is very attractive. And scalable IT resourcing, which is possible through the cloud, is a potentially big thing for small, medium-sized enterprises on the growth trajectory. We also think that for the EU businesses generally, there's a lot of opportunities for high-tech businesses to jump on board this sector as it grows. One of the questions I get asked quite a lot is, well, isn't this something which Europe is already well behind the curve on? And I would say, actually, there's an awful lot of growth potential there, and Europe can be very well positioned to benefit from this. And I think, finally, in terms of those kind of like big headline issues around the economics, the telecommunications companies, which we know are facing rather stagnant demand, potentially can see this as a new area of development for the kinds of services that they do. I mean, quite a few of them are in provision of data centers and corporate services, and we are seeing European telcos, who are relatively strong still, moving into this area and rejuvenating at least a small proportion of their overall revenue. Now, so I believe that Europe can, and in fact should be, strong in cloud. It doesn't have to be Web 2.0 all over again. But if we want this, then we have to really embrace these changes and start approaching cloud computing in terms of the opportunities it offers, in terms of providing opportunities for growth for smart software companies, and in particular identifying areas where we can carve out economic opportunities in sectors where Europe is strong. So services which are dedicated in the business domain, enterprise software, services which are in certain sectors like aerospace or pharmaceuticals where we're still very strong, and indeed even in telecoms. And I think that Europe has a number of potential advantages in there in relation to our regulatory systems. So the fact that Europe has rather stringent data protection rules can actually be a competitive advantage in the end, because people who are using services from companies which are recognized as players and maybe recognized as providers to European governments, it's a kind of a seal of approval that these guys know how to do their business. They are dealing with the security issues properly. They are dealing with their data protection requirement issues properly. They are dealing with the issues of sustainability, which has to do with portability of data properly, and so on. And I think there's a lot of opportunity there for European cloud providers to get into the game. And this is one of the things we're saying in the communication, that actually, you know, the regulatory systems we've got around e-commerce, around data protection, even around intellectual property rights, around digital content, can actually be competitive advantage if we can create a very, very strong single market basis for reaching out in these sectors. We're also saying in the communication that clearing the fog, in a sense, is about understanding what's going on. So there are three actions, core actions in there. One is a piece of work which is ongoing with European Telecom Standards Institute, ECIS, where we have a very open process involving all stakeholders who want to take part to try and map out what are the relevant standards which could be used in the cloud space. We had a big review meeting of that process last week here in Brussels, and I think we're making some progress. The working groups are looking into what are the standards relating to security, what are the standards relating to service level agreements, and what are the standards relating to interoperability and portability. And once we have that, it will help both suppliers and users of cloud services to get a good picture of what are, if you like, the global options for standards which could be offered in the cloud environment. And that's important. So if you look at the interoperability piece, for example, if you move your data into the cloud, what you're doing is you're moving it from your direct control to the control of someone else. And this can be very, very efficient. The risk is, of course, you lose control, direct control over the data. You may actually not have had as much control over the data as you thought before. But the key thing is to be able to answer the question before you do that: what would happen if I had a breakup of relationship with my provider? Would I be able to get my data out and move it somewhere else? What happens if my provider goes bust? Can I actually move that to another platform? So if you're basing these things on standards which are widely recognized, international standards, then you have a much better chance of doing that than if it's embedded in systems which, frankly, are completely untransparent. So it's just an example of standardization work. Similarly with contracts, before you actually sign up to a contract to use cloud, do you know what you're getting into? Have the contracts been written in terms which are in favor of just the supplier, or in terms of just the favor of, or in terms which are more balanced in favor also of the user? What would happen if you had a dispute? What would happen if you wanted to compare a contract from one supplier to another? Could you do that? Are they using the same terms? Are the service levels they're giving comparable in some way? This is the second area we're working on. And then finally, and I think Katerina being here is really good because she's sitting in our steering board on the European Cloud Partnership. The European Cloud Partnership is basically a set of approaches we've built both at strategic level and an operational level to try to get the member states in as a force for defining the way in which cloud provisioning is happening in Europe and to move it forward faster. I already said I think there are tremendous cost advantages for cloud, for public administrations in using cloud. But this is only going to work if there's trust and confidence in the cloud providers. If the member states can be convinced that they can deliver benefits to their consumers, both in terms of quality of service and in terms of cost of delivery using cloud, The way that they do that can be widely emulated. That means that we can move from the relatively low take-up of cloud that we've got across the business, small, medium-sized enterprise scene today, towards quite high levels, and that could have a very important impact in terms of productivity, in terms of growth and the ability to generate jobs.